All right. So I did the thing again where I hit the go live button, started about the first minute and a half of what I was going to say. And then just like that, I realized that I wasn't actually live. And so I was just putting my takes into the ether. They were great takes, I promise you, for that minute and a half. What's up, everyone? It's not Wednesday, but how are you doing? I am Rob, for those of you who don't know. This is the Nocturnal Knockout, a Brass Ring Media podcast on our YouTube channel. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to do a show last night. Not necessarily because I'm busy, it's because I'm washed. Yeah. So I went to a concert Tuesday night, and I go to weeknight concerts, I would say somewhat on a fairly even basis, but I was just like a little extra tired last night. And I begged the powers that be to let me move this show to Thursday. So Zach was accommodating enough, as he is mentioning in the chat. For those of you on RVD's Twitter who are finding me there, first of all, hi. Wrong Rob, not the Rob you're probably looking for. But I'm kind of the lead in for all the juicy stuff that RVD is going to talk to you guys about a little later on. So, what's up, guys? Happy Thursday. Let's see if we can adjust to a Thursday vibe for the Nocturnal Knockout. It's such a Wednesday show. I'm always doing the lead in to Dynamite, but an hour later on a different night. Some of you guys catching it for the first time, welcome. Those of you guys who are here, you guys already know the rules. What are the rules? There's very few of them. Chat, get the conversation going, talk amongst yourselves, talk to me, contribute to the show, add to the show, add a voice to the show, switch the content of the show. That it happens. You can get me on a rant, and some of you in the chat really know how to do that. You do that, we'll take the show in every which direction, because that's what's great about the Nocturnal Knockout. Even though it's not that late at night anymore, the idea is it's after hours. Sometimes we'll have a cocktail. Sometimes we'll take a swig of water for the working man. Either way, we're going to have some fun. We're going to do our things. We're going to look back at old wrestling. We're going to give our takes. Oh, boss, that's a loaded question. All right. So here's what boss asked. He said, Rob, favorite concert you've been to? That's a tough one, because there's some that I just loved the entire experience, and there's some that I really loved the band, and some at like smaller venues, larger venues. I would say like nothing will ever beat that first Warped Tour I went to in 2003. I went through 4 Warped Tours in a row. I felt like that was like my college education at the time, like from my sophomore year all the way to my first year after high school. Nothing will ever quite live up to that, especially those first two, 03 and 04. Those were pretty awesome. Metallica in El Paso a couple of years ago, that was an A+ show. I couldn't believe how awesome they were. And then after that, I would say it's smaller things in clubs. All the times I've seen Rancid in clubs, they've always been just flat out amazing. And then probably the coolest concert experience away from Warped Tour is a couple years ago when I went to the second edition of the When We Were Young Fest in Las Vegas. That was awesome. Getting to see basically every pop punk band that you could want to see in one day. It's kind of like a grown-up, very expensive Warped Tour. That was very fun. So that's where I'm at with that, boss. Thanks for the question. I like your health plan you got going on there. You seem like you really got things together. What's up, Fernando? Good to see you. Good to talk to you guys. You know, you guys were really quiet last week. Rob was over here talking to himself, giving rants and takes to himself. And you know me, I can talk, so I can talk to myself. No problem. But I like you guys to get in on the conversations. I knock everything over here. Now, you guys have no idea probably what we're going to talk about based on the title. It was a little vague. And after I tell you what we're going to talk about, you're probably even less interested in it. But it's my show, and you guys are all here for the ride. So let's get into it just a little bit. You know what? Let's wait on that just a second. I don't know why this. Let me give you a random sports take before we start talking wrestling. Big time of year. Um, in terms of like wrestling. Wrestling's kind of like at a peak, and then it does valley a little bit in the fall. Always because of we got to clear out for football season. Those of us in America, that is our big national obsession. And I remember a few months ago, I'm on here, and we're doing was it the Rumble post show? It was the Rumble post show or the No Way Out Elimination Chamber post show, and we're doing our thing, and we get the message that Luka Doncic was traded to the Lakers, and it's like, no, that can't be right. And then like a few hours before I come on here, a producer texts me that Micah Parsons got traded to the Packers. So how you feeling, Dallas? It's a good time to be a Dallas sports fan. You guys all ready to say goodbye to Arch Manning here pretty soon? Because that's like the next one, the next shoe to drop. Anyway, good job, Jerry Jones. You really did a bang up job of that. Excellent haul you got there from Micah. Excellent job, Jerry. How about them Cowboys? Okay, so Jesse actually is on topic here. So I'm gonna put up Jesse's chat there. It's crazy about the dark days of WWE during the final years of WWE under Vince, even because of the rumors of a power struggle between The Rock, Triple H, because of the failed John Cena turn. Yeah, there's a lot there, Jesse, and we're gonna talk about kind of the end of the Vince McMahon era, but we're gonna focus on a very specific date, and we're gonna do that for a specific reason. So, this last Monday night on Raw, we had another edition of Raw is repetitive because it's kind of the same. It's been kind of the same crap. It's really weird. I think if you're not watching wrestling like regularly and you just see that it's on your Netflix, like, oh, okay, it's Raw time, and I think you tuned in. There's usually like decent matches and it seems kind of high energy. I'm sure like that seems like a good time. Like the wrestling's pretty good, but if you watch Raw every week, you start to realize that it's kind of the same stuff every week. But there was something this week that caught my attention in my coma. Not quite the coma that E was in, more of an like over full on chicken coma than everything E's got going on over there. But Paul Heyman in his promo opposite of Roman Reigns, good to see Roman Reigns finally cares about, being betrayed and all that. It really wasn't until they took his shoes. That's when Roman started to care. I mean, I have a fairly decent shoe game for like a middle-aged guy. Roman's got an excellent shoe game for someone that's my exact same age. And so, yeah, I can get him taking that personally. But he seemed to finally take issue with Paul Heyman. And Heyman dropped a little bit of a line in his promo, noting that we were basically on the week of the 5-year anniversary of the partnership between Roman Reigns and Paul Heyman. Now, obviously, that partnership has gone through some peaks and valleys and really exploded this year as the storyline to one half of the main event of WrestleMania. But Heyman did note that we're about 5 years since this specific era that we're in right now of WWE actually got started. So I thought, maybe what we should do, because we're a show that likes to not cover current topics. No. Why would we do that when we can just date ourselves by about 5 years? And if you actually look at it, this is about the anniversary of 5 years ago when Roman Reigns returned to WWE after a little layoff during the pandemic, missed WrestleMania, aligned himself with Paul Heyman, turned heel, won the title, and had the thing for like 4 freaking years. The anniversary of Roman winning the title is 2 days from now. So on Saturday, it'll actually be 5 years since the Roman reign had begun. Do you guys remember, pop quiz, the name of the pay-per-view where it all began? I'll give you guys like 5 seconds as I take a sip of water and put myself on mute. got water on my finger and it's messing up the trackpad, and all of a sudden I'm scrolling all over the place. So for those of you who've been paying attention, we are 2 days from the awesome 5-year anniversary of Payback 2020. Now, I can't think of, in general, pay-per-views that have less juice to them than a Payback. Maybe Battleground. I think Payback and Battleground should have like fought it out for the PG era's just lamest sounding pay-per-view. They were always very bad. But this Payback, way back in 2020, extremely, extremely important to the future, the rise, and maybe now the fall of WWE. So let's sort of take ourselves back to 2020, a sentence that none of us ever really want to say, but let's sort of put ourselves in that mindset. And we're not going to break down the whole pay-per-view. This isn't a full retro review. Those are fun to do, and someday we'll do them. But what we're going to do is look at each one of the matches on the card and kind of look at where things have gone and where things were back then, because in some ways it's a very similar company, and in other ways the landscape has completely changed. So let's examine some of those changes that have happened over the last half a decade. It's wild to me that the 2020s are halfway over. Thank heaven for that. I'm glad to put that behind us and just, struggle with aging even more. In terms of taking us back, let's actually go back to the year 2020. What an awful time in human history. An awful time that hasn't ever fully subsided, but an awful time nonetheless. Stuff was shut down. We couldn't get haircuts or tattoos. We were all wearing masks. Everyone hated each other, but no one actually spoke to each other. It was awesome, right? We all remember that. Remember what WWE was like post-pandemic? Remember the empty arena era? And not because they weren't selling tickets. It was just literally empty arenas. Remember how that was? Well, that was pretty awful. But if you want to probably trace the return of WWE with it showing a little bit of strength and a little bit of gusto to it, I think we have to start with SummerSlam 2020, which happens obviously right before Payback. And when I say right before Payback, I mean right before Payback, like the week before Payback. There was a thing that's happened in 2015. Remember with Kevin Owens' debut, where if WWE put on a pay-per-view on short notice, it was so notable and they didn't have time to screw it up on TV that they would actually be good. And in this case, we got a 7-day turnaround after the first Thunderdome pay-per-view, which was SummerSlam 2020. We had a 7-day turnaround until we got Payback 2020. So this show easily could have been a SummerSlam 2020 nostalgia show. And obviously SummerSlam used to be kind of close to this in the calendar, but now it's kind of far away, and our minds have kind of checked out of SummerSlam, even though there's anniversaries related to SummerSlam that are more relevant to late August than it is to early August. Nonetheless, in really extremely late August, we were gifted with WWE's Payback pay-per-view, the second one coming from the Thunderdome. Now, the Thunderdome, if you guys recall, that thing was a freaking revelation. It's kind of silly to look back on it. Remember when they went away from it, they made a big old scene about smashing up the Thunderdome and never to be remembered. But to me, you need to smash the Performance Center. If you're going to do that, burn the Performance Center as it was down to the ground. The Thunderdome, that was okay. That at least provided and approximated a bit of a pro wrestling environment. And as Fernando was pointed out, our society as a whole was so bad. Any semblance of normalcy back then felt freaking amazing. And so the Thunderdome really kind of made it acceptable in my eyes to watch wrestling again. I know Fernando doesn't necessarily agree. Fernando says the Thunderdome shows were horrifying. I disagree with that slightly. I think the shows right before the Thunderdome shows were horrifying. These ones are just probably generically bad. So the big story, though, coming into this outside of the Thunderdome was the big story. That's a big story about every 2.5 years, the return of Roman Reigns. Now, Roman has never said publicly why he backed out of WrestleMania that year, but it's pretty obvious. With someone with his history of health and the information that we had at the time, probably not a good idea to be in a communal place at the time. Seems like a logical decision. Luckily, we were spared for a little while. We did eventually get it. A Goldberg Roman Reigns match, especially one that would have happened in an empty arena. Thank God we got Braun Strowman and Goldberg. That was so much better. We also had our Big Show main event that happened with Drew McIntyre, but that's a whole other story. So Roman was back just in time for the Thunderdome, and they never really made it official. I want to say till the SmackDown after Payback, but they were teasing his heelishness, and they were just aligning him with Heyman, and this is where it all kind of gets kicked off. So let's take a look at what else happened on Payback and think about what has happened since then. So the first thing I want to point out is actually the opening match in Payback, because this features some people that are extremely relevant to this day in the form that they had just started in then. I'm talking, of course, about the Hurt Business in its infancy. The Hurt Business had just formed over the summer of 2020 as this new group that we didn't even know if it was going to be anything solvent. Now they're a freaking syndicate at another company who won't do jobs. What growth this was. Remember MVP coming back at towards the beginning of 2020 and such a nostalgia play. And but think about when you get wrestlers back from that era, and this is no disrespect to MVP because obviously he's had a great career and he's great on the mic, and I used to actually enjoy his stuff. I had him pegged as the next Rock at one point, right? Because he did a similar finisher and was doing some mainstream appearances. But at that time, there was no way you could have predicted that the Hurt Business would be what it was in WWE, run up against the Triple H wall, have differences creatively, then go over to AEW and have a very successful run in AEW. This was the start of it, though. This was towards the beginning. What's up, Maddie? How's it going? Happy Thursday, Maddie. Now, with respect, obviously, to Apollo Crews, who we're not going to talk about too much here, this group, though, the Hurt Business in its infancy, I would say initially, and you can see here with Bobby Lashley winning the title, felt much more like a main event vehicle for Bobby Lashley, giving Bobby Lashley some heaters, some people to talk, and some other things to do. Still kind of in that form to this day. However, it's a very successful group with a lot of dynamics and is a big part of every wrestling show that it's on. But the Hurt Business, we need not forget, that's a direct product of the pandemic booking and things that had to be put together. And I would say, if you look back on it after all these years, a pretty good track record coming out of this. I wish maybe, I don't know, doesn't matter, but I wish maybe they could have made it work in WWE. You just hate to see people have fallings out. But if the Hurt Business guys are happier in AEW, more power to them. But this was a bit of the genesis. That was followed up by Big E and Sheamus. I have the headline here. Big E was just getting started. And it wasn't a bad half decade for Sheamus since. But think about putting yourself back in your time machine, getting your DeLorean. If you go back 5 years and we have a match between Big E and Sheamus. Who would you have predicted was going to have the better next half a decade? Now, obviously, it is not the fault of Big E that his promise and his potential was not fulfilled. There was actually clashing momentums between this match and what we had in the previous match, and eventually it led to Big E really doing well initially in his singles run, but then they kind of put him to the side a little bit. And as he was trying to regain that momentum, the injury happened. Not his fault. He still has had a good career even since then. I would say what he's done on commentary, he's awesome. He's just a great presence, but he's missed. That was such a loss. And it's a loss in multiple ways. There was always the stories that the big debate between Vince and Triple H back in the mid 20 teens was who's going to be the next guy, who's going to be the vaunted face of the company. And the finalists were Big E and Roman Reigns. I think two excellent choices. And I think they did become top guys in their own way. Big E was a top guy as a tag wrestler and was being positioned as a push guy until his push went away. But you always got the idea that it probably would come back. I never faulted Big E for how weird his title reign went. But obviously the injury took him out and had detrimental effects on his career. And I hate to say that even the one thing they cashed in about his injury, the New Day turn, has essentially been wasted, just done away with. What about you, Fernando? I might be missing something there. You also have Sheamus, who, let's be honest, by 2020, and I don't remember if this had quite worn off yet, but for the most part, we were tired of Sheamus in like 2012, 2013. And this is like 7-8 years later. Who would have thought that all you needed to do was just let Sheamus wrestle, strip away pieces of the storyline and make him less ridiculous of a character? Turns out the guy was really good at wrestling. Even though he was like older than most of the roster at most of the time he's been with the company, he has simply showed himself to be the ultimate good hand, to the point that you have groups of wrestling fans that are one of their big wrestling payoffs that they need to see is Sheamus win an Intercontinental title. That speaks to the efficacy of what they've done with Sheamus in the last 5 years. Real tragedy, though, what happened with Big E. And I mean that in all earnestness. It makes me sad to talk about what could have been. This should be his time. Don't think that's going to happen, E. All right. Next up, I skipped way ahead. Yeah, he absolutely did. That was the other champ at the time, and that was our dueling momentums until they met at Survivor Series, and we established who the top guy was. We're not going to talk a lot about it, but the next match on the card was Matt Riddle versus Baron Corbin. Doesn't that sound like a blast from the past? Just because neither guys are with WWE anymore. But it's funny because do you ever see a headline about Matt Riddle these days and not just roll your eyes? There's something very eye-rolling about him. Then you go to Bishop Dyer, Baron Corbin. He's engaging. He's got on his podcast. He's the complete opposite of how we felt about him back in WWE. Both of these guys, though, got so much TV time before, during, and after this. Remember how much TV time Riddle got on his run with Randy Orton? Remember how much TV time Baron Corbin got before this, like 2019, when him, Drew McIntyre, and Bobby Lashley, I think, ruined wrestling way before John Cena successfully did so earlier this year? What a time to be alive all that was. Okay, the next one had me thinking. So we actually had ourselves a little tag match. Sasha and Bayley, at the time the holders of the women's title, taking on Nia Jax and Shayna Baszler. Now, there are a few title runs for the Boss 'n' Hug connection, Bayley and Sasha Banks. I don't remember this one very specifically. We all remember the first one that ended the Iconics at WrestleMania. And if some journalists are to be believed, they were apparently pouting on the floor backstage, or they weren't. I don't know. The poor guys apologized for the reporting. I don't know if his reporting was actually solid or not, but it was what it was. Then there was, and it wasn't the Boss 'n' Hug connection, there was Naomi and Sasha and their title run. And that ended with both of them leaving the company and kind of kickstarted this amazing run that Mercedes has been on. That's interesting, E, because like you talk about the anguish and strife and all that with Bayley. Well, you know what that's been doing in the promos? Bailey was like a freaking workhorse through the first half of this decade. She was, if we don't like what Bailey was involved in, it's because she was involved in everything. But you look at this one, this was another title reign that seemed like it was kind of cut short, although both members did get a bit of a run off of this. This started the big Bailey heel turn that they had, and Bailey really did kind of level up from here. And so I put the headline there. Have they all leveled up? Shayna Baszler, I would say, is maybe in a better position, even though she's not on television anymore. She's working backstage in NXT. She's a little bit older. She's in a good spot. Her career, unfortunately, was supposed to peak a few months before this with the big match with Becky at WrestleMania. Remember that when they turned her into a freaking vampire? That's how they were going to sell it. But no. Nia Jax has come and gone from the company, I think, a few times since then. She's obviously favored, I think, both by Triple H and probably by The Rock. And I would say she's a pretty damn good heel if she did anything other than feud with Tiffany Stratton. I mean, I think Stratton was a great heel, but I wonder why they can't get any babyface heat on her. Not sure what's going on there. Maybe she's just not a freaking babyface. Or maybe because it's so redundant because all she does every week on SmackDown after we have Raw as repeat, we have same old SmackDown and Nia Jax and Tiffany. They're the Punk and Rollins of Friday nights. Mercedes, unless you are of the opinion that the only place that pro wrestling can happen and all that matters is in WWE. Other than that, I think Mercedes has done very well for herself. Obviously, she's not necessarily anyone's favorite person, I think, outside of Bailey within WWE. She's not necessarily a martyr figure or anything like that for the stance that she took. And her indie run for the first few years, honestly, was lacking. But ever since she really locked into the character she's in now and everything she's doing, it's been great. And I think whether you like it or whether you don't, this is the vision that Mercedes always kind of had for herself. And I think she had to be away from WWE to completely explore and see that vision through. Bailey's interesting. Bailey has always been relied upon. Her first WrestleMania, she freaking won in the title match. Unfortunately for Bailey, the thing that's always haunted her on the main roster, there was never an acceleration up to her point the way there was in NXT. So the audience never quite had that same exact connection. She's done very well for herself, and I think, again, a workhorse of the company, more so than like anyone else in this frame that I'm looking at. Yeah, she's been the workhorse. She's been a major heel. She's been a major face, and now they're doing a bit of a redemption arc with her and see where she goes. I think she's had a really good career. I don't know if she's necessarily in such a better place now than she was in 2020, but I don't think she was in a bad place in 2020. And I think she's more ensconced now. She's more of a made woman, if you will, than she was back then. How are we going to re-rank the horsewomen here? Fernando, are we going to go, what's our ranking? We put in poor Charlotte at number 4. It depends on, okay, WWE career overall. We've got Charlotte at 4. Then you're putting Bailey at 3, Mercedes at 2, and I think we know who's number 1 in that equation. For those of you wondering, by the way, the other thing that was happening in 2020 was Becky was pregnant, so she peaced out about a month after WrestleMania. Next up, Keith Lee beat Randy Orton. Damn, that seems like such a dated thing. You feel for Keith Lee. He had the health issues. He didn't feel like WWE treated him well. His push was weird. Remember early 2020, though? In that Royal Rumble where Brock Lesnar killed everyone until Drew got him. The only other people that really got in offense on him were Ricochet of all people and Keith Lee. And it kind of looked like we wanted a Keith Lee Brock program. That's like something that was bound to happen. I always felt like Keith Lee was right on the cusp. And if they would just do a little bit with him, it would be great. It also didn't work out too well at AEW, but it is what it is. There was a moment in time where it felt like Keith Lee was really going to be a player. I would say, though, if you look at this photo again, who would you have predicted was going to have the better next 5 years? This is a little bit easy. This would have been a little bit closer, I think, than the other one of Sheamus and Big E. But who would have thought that Randy's career would have sustained in the way that it has? and not necessarily as the result of nepotism and second chances and all those things that can be credited to his early career. Randy's been just put in a solid half a decade since then. So Randall Keith Orton moved on to better things. Keith Lee, this is about the peak. This is as good as it was gonna get. He seemed like he was really gonna be pushed, but again, we're still at the end of the Vince era with a lot of starts and stops, and yeah, and you got to remember that we're 2 years away from Vince stepping away at any capacity. Keith Lee was a great pick for next big thing. I think what factored into it of making that pick, and because I think people misunderstand this, actually was his size and his physique. Because of Vince's obsession with purely like roided up, no body fat people in the mid 2000s, I think we had kind of forgot that Vince did like a overweight heel. He liked that to be the person that a Hogan or a Luger or Brett went up against. And I always thought that's why he at least had somewhat of a use for someone like Kevin Owens, like Samoa Joe. And I thought that Keith Lee would fit into that category. Luckily, his wife, or I said happily, his wife, Mia Yim, still with the company, not exactly at the top of the card, but has had a nice little run herself in WWE. I wish she would be pushed a little bit more, but she has remained a presence in the lower rung of that division. Next up, Seth and Buddy Murphy against Rey and Dominic Mysterio. Can you think of just what transformations everybody, with the exception of Rey, who's the oldest one here, he's changed the least, have gone through since this time? Now, the lead up to this, do you guys recall what one of the big angles in the lead up to this was? You guys remember what evil thing that the Monday Night Messiah or whatever he was going by at that time? Do you remember what the big angle was and a big part of his feud with the Mysterios? Well, there's two things. There's the whole Aaliyah part of it, which I don't even remember what the hell happened to that. But there was also the whole "I'm gonna take your eye out" angle, and I popped your eye out in a cage match at Extreme Rules a few months before. That was before this. This was almost a blow. They actually met Rey and Seth met the next month. This was almost a blow up to that. So that's what we had coming in here. And look at all these guys. Buddy Murphy, I would say he's got about a 500 record. Hasn't had like the greatest career at AEW, but it's been solid. And he's also acquired Rhea Ripley. So I would say overall, thumbs up for Buddy Murphy. Rey Mysterio, honestly, hasn't done that much in the last 5 years either, other than being freaking Rey Mysterio, just being the legend that he is. And that's all that he honestly needs to do at this point. Seth Rollins, I think, is the champion and may remain so after Sunday, and takes up a lot of oxygen in WWE television right now, as he always has. But he's gone through some cycles. This is his Monday Night Messiah era, so it's slightly before his fancy dress era, which was kind of the same character, but transitioned into the Visionary. Now he's got the Vision, he's got all that going. Where at least I think you can say now he's unquestionably like a tentpole guy, even though I will say this, he is the least pushed of all the tentpole guys. He loses. He's the guy that's in the top mix that's meant to lose. I mean, I thought he was great in his role at WrestleMania 40, where all he did was take damage. But his character, I think, is in a better place. I don't know if he's necessarily better now, because I think this was the start of that run. I don't think any of Seth's characters have ever been horrible. I think the thing that struggles with Seth is he kind of gets too much TV time. And he's a good speaker, but not the best promo. And he can very easily fall into Triple H, very long opening promos. But he doesn't have the game voice to talk for 30 minutes, to suck all the ratings in the promo. And then he'll take a day off during football season. Instead, it's me, Seth. I'm the savior. That's what we got going with Seth. But the whole point of this is to point out how much 20-year veteran Dominic Mysterio has leveled up since then. So I think someone put up a tweet the other day or said something like, "Hey, it's funny how we really thought Dominic was a bad idea many years ago, and now he's the guy that on this show we even pegged as one of the pillars of the future of the company, and he's doing stuff. He's like the WWE guy for AAA now. I don't know if he'll ever ascend to true top guy status, or he's going to be more of like a Miz top guy, but he's at the top of the card. He's involved in all the major storylines. My guy in storyline, he's a freaking. He can bag him in storyline. What's he got? Raquel, Rhea, Liv, all of that. Even like, it's funny because the Judgment Day, we always think it outlives its usefulness, but it keeps giving us someone else. And right now, Dom is what the Judgment Day is kind of giving us. But when we talk about going back to that tweet about thinking it was a bad idea, do you remember the whole contrast? Is they booked him really weird as this like timid kid, but he would be pretty good when he would do wrestling stuff, but it was still awkward and uncomfortable. The character was really awkward and uncomfortable because even though he was like 26 and towered over his dad, they sort of made it like he picked up the character of infant, Eddie just lost custody of him. That character, it seemed like how they portrayed him. And I think he always had that little bit of ring talent. And then they turned him heel and they leaned into him being inexperienced, being naive. And that's when it really started clicking. Think about that match he had with Cody Rhodes and Money in the Bank in 2023. And like, this is it. And now he's unquestionably one of the cornerstones of that company. When you think there's a big storyline coming, you think Dominic Mysterio. And it's amazing. I'm really glad Eddie was able to sire him because it gave him his height that he didn't get from Ray. He's got better mic skills than Ray. He'll never be able to wrestle like Ray, and he'll never have the cult following that Ray has. But I wonder how we're going to look at that because, obviously Ray's like a legend, and you could say like where he didn't go in WWE. He still was a main champion there. He was a fixture there for his size, and then now for his age, Rey Mysterio is awesome. Dominic may never reach those heights, but I don't think this is like a David Sammartino, Bruno kind of situation. I don't know what the better analogy is, but the arrow seems so far pointed up for Dom. And finally, the new era that lasted for the next 4 years that essentially kind of kicked off the boom of WWE was officially started on this night. Now I put some of the shots there and explain that, Fernando, because I don't agree with that. Dusty does. That's a very good one, Nathan. Nathan's got it. Nathan landed the analogy in that Dusty is beloved legend, and Dustin is Hall of Fame level good, Hall of Fame level career and output. That excellent, Nathan. I like when our friends on Twitter can provide us with good feedback, and they're just less disappointed that the wrong Rob is talking. Where I disagree with Dom being Charlotte, though, is so Charlotte's not as bad as we sometimes speak about her, but she's not as good as WWE presents her as. I don't think WWE presents Dom in a way that kind of overdoes it. So that's why I disagree with you. On to the new era. Remember, this started with the advocate Paul Heyman, the wise man, going over contract details with Roman Reigns. That was the first bit of returning Roman Reigns. He was very stern about contract details. Didn't even sign into this match until 3/4 of the way, till the Fiend and Braun Strowman had basically taken each other out. And again, I remember going on my podcast I was doing with Rick Monsey at the time. The next day, I was like, I don't know. I don't think Roman actually turned heel. I think it was just Roman being Roman. So I was naive to that. And then he cuts the promo on that Friday Night SmackDown, and he was very, very clearly heel. But it wasn't necessarily as heel right there. So if you look at it too, why is he signing that contract with Heyman? For a second, you almost think this was like a Money in the Bank match, which would be an interesting piece of symmetry for Roman Reigns, but it wasn't. My man just did in kayfabe what CM Punk supposedly did at Money in the Bank 2011, where he signed the contract the night of. Don't know if I believe that story, but it's a hell of a good story. Roman Reigns is playing hard to get, kind of the superstar athlete that they were building that into. He signs the contract, he arrives, he wrecks everyone, he leaves, and he has the title. You always knew Roman Reigns was going to get the belt back, and this kind of felt like the delay from what they wanted to do back in March or April for WrestleMania. So I understand if you were cynical at the time, like this was just going to be another Roman Reigns run. Thankfully, he feuded with Jey Uso right out of the bat. And I think that really helped enhance the character immediately, put emotional stakes and weight to the character, and eventually led to um the entirety of the bloodline, not just Roman Reigns being that character. What stands out on all these photos though is who were not seen or who lost the match. The Fiend had a the Fiend was always weird, and we don't want to, or I don't want to speak ill of the dead in that way, because I think Bray Wyatt was a genuine human being and very creative, and gave it his all in his thing. I personally never thought the Fiend fully connected in WWE the way they were going for. It was very popular, but it would never really worked as the main event character. Braun Strowman, I think you can say similar. They got the most use out of Braun Strowman on his rise to the top. Main event Braun Strowman was never kind of meant to be. Braun Strowman did not have the makeup, I think, of a modern champion in the same kind of way. And so it's almost as if, though, Roman came in to cleanse WWE of these burly guys who were at the time dominating the title scene, and start like it's such a flip on a different era. The way these guys were taken out, we were still technically in the era that those guys would dominate. In that era, I don't think didn't flip for a little while. But I think you can say symbolically there was something to this, and something to the way that Roman Reigns conducted himself. Yeah, that's crazy. I did see that. I saw so many posts because I always remember. I always categorize it because that's how it was done on Raw, and obviously one was different than the other. But it was Bray Wyatt and it was Terry Funk, and it just felt like the universe was just awful. Summer of 23 for me personally was a pretty awful time, and when those two things happened, it was just like, what are we coming to? Terry Funk was much less tragic, no less sad, but much less tragic. I still have a hard time processing that Bray is not with us. Like there's a part of me, and obviously I'm not a family or friend, but there's a part of me that almost thinks like, wow, that is unbelievable that he is no longer with us. I mean, it's no less sad what happened with Brody as well, and both of them leaving behind many children, wives, family, and friends who absolutely loved and adored those two men. But I would say maybe because of I don't know. Well, no, that happened in a time with the tributes that went on. Not that I can accept Brody, but like it's something that's known and is part of, I feel like there's a certain trauma with, I don't know what I'm trying to say though, with Bray's death though, that it, like me personally, I've never been able to fully like conceptualize it in that kind of way. A shout out to Bray. I actually saw what you talk about the anniversary of his passing. They were showing like I saw some of his photographs when he played college football and such, and I was never the biggest fan of him in the ring, but I've yet to find someone that says anything bad about him personally. Maybe there's creative differences is the only thing you could really say about him. Braun Strowman, again, I think he got everything he could get out of his career. I think sometimes we lament the Rybacks and the Strowmans in which they would have existed in different eras because they might have been more successful in different eras, but I don't know if that's always the case. I think maybe like you can say there's a difference between the Kanes, the Undertakers, the Big Shows, and these guys, and that's okay. Obviously, Roman and Heyman have gone on to super successful things. Fernando noted we wanted Roman to turn heel for a long time. We did. And I've always appreciated one thing about that heel turn. That's the last thing I'll say about it. The heel turn worked for one of the reasons that the John Cena heel turn didn't. There was one promo in the Roman heel turn where Paul Heyman said, "You booed this man when he had cancer." And they never focused on the crowd again. The entirety of the heel turn, which partially benefited from being in the Thunderdome, was all about the evil things that Roman Reigns was going to do to manipulate and keep that title. And they were able to build that without crowds all the way to WrestleMania and then eventually to SummerSlam. Meanwhile, John Cena is ranting about the fans and how they treated him 5 years ago for like 4 months. Do you want to contrast why those heel turns did and didn't work? I think that, if anything, shows it to you. Like, there was no reason to boo John Cena other than he decided he was a heel now, and he did the low blows and such. There wasn't really to Cody. There really wasn't a logic to it. I mean, I guess the alignment, but we know they didn't explain all that. Roman's heel turn didn't have to be super explained. You just saw it unfold, and it made sense as it unfolded. And I remember later when they did, maybe it was that heel documentary or one of those, Heyman laying out all the reasons why this character would be heel was logic and it fit together, but they didn't even need that on television. That's why that heel turn was so well done. I do feel there's some vindication, though, in that turn Roman heel, it'll work. Turn Roman heel, it'll work. And it was such an easy thing for us to spat up and podcasts on the internet, on the message boards at the time. But they turned him heel, and they had a freaking boom period, sold the company, survived multiple horrific human trafficking scandals. Turning Roman heel, good move, worked out for you. And that was Payback 2020. That was a snapshot of WWE 5 years ago. What do you think? Has it changed? Gotten better overall since this time, but we're in a bit of another dip. So I want to pose that question to you guys. Is the boom over? And if the boom's over, what was the best part? And what could get the boom going again? Because that's the other reason why I wanted to bring that up, because I think that kind of bookends the boom. I think a lot of us are citing WrestleMania 40 might be this era's WrestleMania 17, the biggest culminating match of the era, and then everything falls off after. Difference is, I don't think that things had to fall off the way they kind of had to in 2001. That's just been poor booking and corporate oversight. What's up, Maria? Sorry, I'm like a day and a half late, so you're on time ish. The bubble has burst. I agree, Fernando. I agree. Hey, Maria. Yeah, I think it has. It feels like less of a dire situation in some ways than WWE did in 2001, because you got to remember, like, WWE, a lot of things were failing. The XFL had failed. The merger had failed. They were still doing well, and they would still be able to run off the fumes of the Attitude Era, but they had to fix that relatively quick. My fear now is that they don't realize that anything needs to be fixed because they're doing so well. But there is such a negative vibe around the company, around the programming, around the television right now, that absolutely the only conclusion to draw that the bubble has burst and they need a bit of a reset. Now, it doesn't need to look drastically different, but there's a certain thread there on storyline rise and stuff that I think they basically locked themselves into for 2 years. Post Bloodline, post Roman's reign. The Rock is a factor, TKO is a factor, Triple H is a factor, returns, departures, and all that. All factors. And you add that together, and we have, once again, a profitable wrestling landscape where the top company is a little uninspired. I think to answer your question, the idea was just to get buzz after SummerSlam and let people ease into the idea of Brock being around. I think that was the whole idea there. We have about 9 minutes before I'm going to get on out of here. Let's do a classic shoot from the hip pay-per-view prediction. The other thing, what do you guys think of the AEW show this weekend? I thought it was a pretty darn good show. Not necessarily an earth-shattering show or anything like that, but I thought it was a quality show. But I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about the show this weekend. For those of you who are tuning in for the first time, it seems like I never can do current pay-per-view reviews, but it is what it is. I didn't watch Heat Wavy. Sorry. So my NXT fandom or my NXT viewing goes from ease suggestions and quote what I have time. I don't think NXT is a bad product. It's just not one that I prioritize. But I stay afloat because of people like you. So you really liked Forbidden Door. Fernando said Forbidden Door was fire. So let's make some quick, non-really analyzed predictions. It's true. But I like the idea of me fooling people and thinking that I'm Rob Van Dam and grifting off of that. I mean, I'm opening for the guy here. Might as well. Okay, where am I at there? What am I trying to do? Why am I acting like such a I said I had extra time, so I guess my idea was to completely waste it. There we are. All right. The most reliable source of human information, Wikipedia. We'll start. Becky versus Nikki for the IC championship. What do you think of Becky's week she's having? That was a hell of a line she put out there about Ozzy, and you have Kelly Osbourne responding, and it's kind of like, did they go too far? Is this all kind of part of the work? I think WWE doesn't mind, according to the controversy in this case. I'm of two minds about how actually Ozzy would have felt. Ozzy was a wrestling fan, and I think he would have appreciated parts of it. I don't think Ozzy would have been happy with his children being hurt. So there is that, but a little bit of an international incident that Becky Lynch caused this week. I give Nikki credit. I'm pretty critical of Nikki all the time. I think she's given it her best, but her best will not be good enough. And the great icy reign of Becky Lynch, Becky Hogan, whatever you want to call her, I think that's going to continue. Roman Reigns versus Bronson Reed. Is there like shoes on a pole in this stuff? Like the Jordan brand match? I generally agree with you, Fernando. I think you have now, what Paige said to Charlotte and not kind of clearing that with everyone involved. I was not cool with that, 10 years ago. Jeez. That was 10 years ago. That was like 10 years ago, like this month, right? Holy hell. I'm agreeing with E. Roman's not flying to Paris to lose. It's kind of my problem with this version of the babyface Roman character. He's still just unbeatable. There's a sort of Superman quality to him. You don't assume he's ever going to lose any of these matches. He's never really in peril other than his shoes getting stolen. But Roman's got enough cash. He could just go to Foot Locker and buy some more. I don't know what his deal is. Promising to be the match of the night, we got the good old Donnybrook match. Sheamus and Rusev. They'll have themselves a banger. It'll be hard hitting. I'm going to say Sheamus goes over. Make people happy. That'll be a banger. We'll be talking about it. Sheamus will get Intercontinental title buzz coming off of that match. Mark that down. Guaranteed. I know you're meaning to say Rusev, Fernando, but I love the way your autocorrect Rusev like that. No, don't even put up the Rusev post, Fernando. I like Rusev. That's like if he was going to TNA, maybe they would call him that. We don't need the League of Nations back. We can leave that in 2016 where it belongs. It'll stay there with the lockbox and Shane McMahon being featured in pay-per-views. Wikipedia has this listed as the second from the top match, and I think in order of how these things have been promoted, it might even be the third from the top. We have a fatal four-way for a World Heavyweight Championship match that I don't think anyone cares about. Seth Rollins defending against CM Punk, Jey Uso, and LA Knight. I'm not loving the Seth Rollins title reign. It's not time to end it, and this isn't the time of a second match from the top. Rollins is retaining. There's going to be plenty of shenanigans. I can even see an evolution to his visionary team. I think something like that maybe unfolds. And finally, John Cena versus Logan Paul. They have foregone making John Cena be a heel, which is great because the heel turn was terrible. And he's cut some pretty good promos as a babyface. They are going to milk every bit of him still being a babyface while they can have it. They missed out on a little too much. John Cena ain't doing the job to Logan Paul here. Logan Paul can take the L to John Cena. I don't think so, E. I don't think so. That'd be a hell of a move by Cena. And I think honestly, Logan Paul may be in bigger title matches going forward. So it's not the worst idea from a booking standpoint. I just don't personally see it happening. Fernando's got Brock Lesnar appearing to attack Cena, probably. I mean, if that's what a heelish thing it would be for Logan Paul to claim victory over John Cena, and it's because of Brock Lesnar. Only Eddie Guerrero can get away with that level of assistance and it not really factoring in to anything, which it would factor into a ton there. But I'm saying only Eddie Guerrero can do that. The help he got from Goldberg was like, Goldberg was big. It's okay that he cheated. No, Ian, it's not the same Super Cena, but I do think we might be in a bit of because other than this match, it seems like all he's going to do is wrestle these like legends. So this is the only guy really for him to put over. Because I don't think he needed to put over Cody in the way all that went down. Although I thought they had a really good match and really exercised many of the demons that they created at WrestleMania. Speaking of demons, I'm gonna hit that sleep demon in a little bit. I've been getting my ass handed to me at work, so I'm freaking tired, guys. And that was a fun hour talking about Payback 2020. I will not see you guys next week. I haven't told Zach, but I got some stuff going on Wednesday and Thursday night of next week. So that ain't going to happen. So I'm just giving you guys the heads up. So I will talk to you guys in about 2 weeks. I hope a lot of crazy stuff happens between now and then so we can talk about it all, break it down, have our big experiences, and get ready for our September pay-per-view war. As if you were watching last time I was on, I'm advocating for them to fight. So let's let them fight. And it's going to happen a little sooner than we thought in terms of all the dynamics. Really wish that news wasn't breaking right when I came on the show last week and didn't have that information. All right, guys. You guys all got to be prepared for the big RVD stream. I'm going to let you guys do your thing. Maddie and E, you can get you guys' preparations together. I'm going to go take a nap, like a 9-hour nap. I'm going to call that sleep. Have a good night, guys. See you in a couple weeks.